Fugelsang. John, it's so good to see you. Thank you for doing this.
Vicki, I had the best time doing your show in 2011, and I'm thrilled you invited me back this soon. Really, normally I've got to wait a lot longer. So thank you. Thank you so much.
You are so gracious, and we were supposed to do, no, you are. We were supposed to do this when the fires, like the day after the fire started, the
Yeah,
hours after the fire started, and you were like, yeah, of course. And then you were like, will you do it this day? Yeah, of course.
I know.
And you,
I'm so great. I'm humbled by how humble I am, really. Like I was like, "Oh, your entire coast is on fire. We can wait." I mean, like I'm really the hero of the whole thing, but go on, please.
no, but you really, no, no.
Of course I didn't mind. My goodness, Encino is on fire for God's sakes. I'm just glad you're okay.
Well, no, but seriously, you've been every step of the, I don't remember what it was, and we didn't talk about this before we came on the air, but I seem to recall that when before we first met, we had a bristle, but I can't remember what it was. Do you?
No, but I usually say something to offend people on accident on a regular basis, so I apologize in perpetuity for whatever it might have been.
I can't remember what it was, but then I met you at Eve Branstein's. You were doing like a poetry slam, or I don't know what you were doing. It was fabulous, and we became fast friends. And then you agreed to do my living room, and
Oh my God,
that
yes.
was spectacular.
Well, it was a pleasure, and it's a pleasure to have had a bristle with you. What is a bristle, by the way? Is that like a tussle and
It's
I'm
a
not.
tussle without physical. It,
Oh,
it,
okay.
I don't
I
have a
love
brush, and
those.
but what was so lovely is that well, everything about it was lovely, but you were agreeable then, you're agreeable now.
We were doing a tour at the time, this big tour, the first year of the Sexy Liberal tour, and we were playing in LA at the Pantages. And I'll never forget because Lily Tomlin and Rob Reiner were joining us at that show. And so that was the same weekend I came and did your show. And it was so amazing because I'm having to do all this big stand up and, political stuff. And I came to your show and I got to really do a storytelling piece
Which was
about the time I
gorgeous.
offered hot gay sex to David Duke on the Bill Maher show if he'd stop being a Nazi Klansman. And your crowd was just I mean, it was a room full of writers, so it was very intimidating because when you come to, bring your stuff to a room like that, these are people who really do it. So it was completely an honor, and I'm thrilled to drag you back down to my level again here.
You know, okay, you don't get to say that to me because I am in awe because I've been doing the John Fugelsang deep dive,
Oh dear.
and I am so, we're both interviewers. You're a lot of things. It's one of the things that you are. And I've written a book, and I don't even know if you know this, but Carl Reiner published my book.
I didn't
Speaking of
know.
a Reiner,
No, I had no idea, but
yeah.
wow,
So
amazing.
that was pretty wild. But we both have, you do a lot of things, and you do them big and well. I do them small and little, but you are
What a
on the
great
air.
Catholic. What a great Catholic you would have made. My God, you know how to
Jewish,
minimize your
John.
cat. I know, what a
Oh,
loss. What a loss. You could have had all that guilt, but added shame. But your stuff is great. You're not going to get to sell yourself short with me, okay? It's going to be Catholic versus Jew in the guilt Olympics, and you're going to lose. I promise you. We pack shame. We know how to win these things.
I think that is the difference, and
Yes.
we'll get into the Catholic
I'll
stuff. But
explain. I can explain the difference between Catholic and Jewish guilt
do it.
any day.
Go for it.
Oh my God, if you feel bad about something you did, that's guilt, and that can be good. If you feel bad about who you are, that's shame. But if you feel bad because you think God wants you to feel more guilt, that's Catholic. That's Catholic. Now, I grew up on Long Island, so I felt a lot like Jesus because I was surrounded by Italians and Jews everywhere. And I tried to convert to Judaism when I was 15, but because I just thought you guys have like a guilt liposuction day. You get one day where you go and Sylvia, you look
Throw it
great.
in the
Thanks.
water.
Got my guilt done. You look great. So I tried to convert, but my rabbi said I was too neurotic to become Jewish. So
There is no such thing.
your whole tribe dodged a bullet that day, let me tell you.
Such thing as too neurotic. So wait a minute, where on Long Island did you grow up? Because
First, I grew up in a town called Bohemia, which is in the Guinness Book as the most ironically named town in America. And if you knew what Bohemia meant, you were the Bohemian. It's lovely. It's where the pigeons go to die from the city. It's great. And then I moved to Stony Brook. And so yeah, so I lived in those two places, but a ways out there.
wow, because I used to go from the city to Long Island to do comedy at East
Yeah,
Side Comedy Club. Yeah.
right on.
But and my stepmother lived in Stony Brook. Well, Stony Brook, there was like nobody there except there was the college, but other than that,
Let
there
me tell you,
was
the part of Long Island where I'm from, Joey Buttafuoco jokes are still hot. Okay, that's like it's still fresh where I come from. Trust me.
okay. So all right. So since we're here, we'll continue down this path. So you're a kid on Long Island. You have a rather unusual, and I know everybody asked you this, but we have to go here because it's quite unusual. Your parents are not the average mom and dad. John,
No.
tell us why, John.
I was raised abnormally Catholic. My
I'm
mother,
normally Catholic.
yeah, my mother turns out was a nun for 16 years
And
before.
now you did not know that, correct? At the beginning?
Correct. I did not know it for until I was 7 or so. They never told me.
And how
Um,
did you find out?
well, she was a nun. My father was a Franciscan brother. He taught history to Catholic boys in Brooklyn and dressed like a Jedi Knight in the brown robes and the rope belt. And
And are they allowed to marry?
no, they had to leave. They both had to leave.
He had to leave too.
My
Okay.
father was Brother Boniface for many years, and my mother was Sister Damien for many years. Those were their names. When they met each other, those were their names. And eventually, the convent sent my mother off to Africa to work with lepers as a nurse. My mother was a nurse. For many people, for throughout history, and this is something de Tocqueville talks about, like the only way to rise in society, if you weren't born a noble, the only way to rise was to join the church. And maybe you could be a bishop one day. And for generations, I mean, it's been you could join the church and get out of poverty, or you could join the military. And so my mother, they put her through nursing school, sent her off to Africa, first to work with lepers and then in a hospital.
What was your mother's I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Where did your mother come from that she was trying to get out of?
My mother came from the segregated South in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. And so the convent put her through nursing school. She joined right after the prom.
Wow.
And then they sent her briefly to Brooklyn, where my father was one of her patients at Holy Family Hospital. And he fell madly in love with her, even though he knew he wasn't allowed to and had promised his God he never would. And then they shipped her off to Africa. And my dad was her pen pal for many, many years. And eventually, it's a long, long story, but eventually, after about 10 years, he convinced her to leave the convent and go on a date. And so that's how I'm here. So it was pretty dramatic because she left at after 16 years with a one gray cotton dress and $200. And
And one date.
I mean, yeah, he told her he was in love with her before she ever left.
Okay.
And she was this is the next book, Vicki. But yeah, it was quite a story. He was in love with her for a very long time, and at one point he borrowed a car when she was briefly reassigned back to Virginia, and he drove down to find the hospital she was working an overnight in, and told her he was in love with her, and she threw him out of the hospital. But he kept at it, and eventually she left, and they were married on a Southern Army base about 2 months later, and it was a first love and a second marriage for them both.
A second marriage for them. But this is a movie, John. You know this is a movie. This is
I
I
did
was
a
going to
solo
say this is
show.
a Spielberg movie, but it's the wrong religion to be a Spielberg movie.
Well, I did a solo show off Broadway that dealt with their story a bit a few
And
years
it
back,
was
and
award winning.
yes, it
And
was, yeah,
yes.
and I thought the book I'm writing now was going to be all about this, but then the book I'm writing wound up being about something else, and so we'll do the
Tell
story
us the
about.
name of your book, John. The full title of your book, please.
Well, this ties into the politics, Vicky. My book is called Separation of Church and Hate, a sane person's guide to taking back the Bible from fundamentalists, fascists, and flock-fleecing frauds. And it is a book about how to use the Bible against these revoltingly fake Christians of MAGA and the Republican Party. It's about how Christian nationalists reject the teachings of this Jesus they wave around like a prop, and you don't need to believe in the Bible as literal fact to call out these people for being frauds. So it's kind of like a guide to how to use the Bible and the New Testament on every issue that defines us to show how the right wing, the ones who are the loudest and most obnoxious about their Christianity, don't actually follow this Christ character at all. And so it's a book about how to take them on using scripture rather than just calling them names.
I love that, John. Now, for me, as a Jewish woman, will it give me some tools?
Oh, yes, I'll be Gentile with you. Yes, in fact, I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that I was doing justice to the Jewish scriptures. I interviewed Rabbi Danya Rutenberg quite a bit for this, and it really helped me deepen my understanding of first century Judea and the world that Jesus grew up in. And the conservative authoritarians he rebelled against, some of which he may have just been arguing about, like rabbis do. But yeah, look, it's for anybody who's a believer or a non-believer who's ever going to have to live with these people or have coworkers like this or neighbors or relatives, that family member, uncle racist that ain't dead inside who comes over for Thanksgiving and they're still mad about Pride Month and it's November, the Christian nationalists, these revolting fraud Christian fundamentalists, it really goes after, it's a book that goes after how we got here, how in the late 70s and early 80s the Jerry Falwells and the Pat Robertsons couldn't use segregation anymore, so they shifted to abortion. And how 5 years after Roe v. Wade, which was not controversial at all, the right wing latched onto the issue of criminalizing abortion, and the media got on board with that. And to this day, people believe that Christianity is about screaming at women outside clinics, when the reality is, and it blew my mind when I grew up and learned this, the Bible's not against abortion. God never bans it. Moses, Jesus, St. Paul. You'd think God would have had one of his prophets or messengers say, don't do this at some point. In Exodus 21, God asserts that a fetus is property and that a woman's life has more value in his eye. Numbers chapter 5 actually has a formula how to commit an abortion if a man suspects his wife is pregnant by another man. Jesus is against the death penalty, very much so. Never once comes out against abortion. So to me, that's the greatest irony of our time, and that's what's driven our politics. That's how these scumbags, these racist frauds like Donald Trump can get so much power. It's because Christianity has become so warped in this country that they got the followers of Jesus to vote against everything Jesus ever talked about by talking about abortion, which Jesus never talked about.
And
You also can't be a homophobe as well. Like everything they've sold Christianity to be in the last 40 years is a complete goddamn lie. And if you actually go by Jesus, it is not possible to support Donald Trump in any way. And this book will show how and why that is. And it was this way long before Donald Trump came on the scene.
we're going to talk a lot more about that. But I
Great.
also heard you say something that you've moved away from religion. I heard you say a couple of I've heard you say many fascinating things, but two
Oh
things
dear.
that spark on this topic. One being that people, wait, I want to get this right, that you left organized religion. Tell us why you left organized religion.
Oh boy.
Well, you boiled it down to one thing in the interview that I heard.
Well, when I was a kid, I realized that my first experience realizing that maybe the Catholic Church was not right about everything was the issue of women in the priesthood.
This is what I heard you say. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the death penalty was a big thing for me too. Like the Bible as a teenager radicalized me on the death penalty, but the Catholic Church, to their credit, is very anti-death penalty. This guy especially. No, for me, I was about 16 or 17, and I realized that it was absolute psychotic bullshit that this church would not allow the Virgin Mary to say mass if she came back. And that Jesus had women that went with him everywhere. I mean, it was really 15 apostles, but they didn't count women as people back then. If it said Jesus spoke to 5,000 people, it meant he spoke to 5,000 men because women and children weren't counted as people. Women were
Mhm.
property, first of their fathers and then of their husbands. I will say that, the Jews have come a long way and are way ahead on female equality than the Catholics, for God's sakes. But Jesus was the greatest feminist in the entire Bible, knocking down barriers all over the place in ways they don't teach you as kids. We're taught this whole thing of him meeting the Samaritan woman at the well and how he knew that she had five husbands. They never tell you that it was illegal for him to talk to a woman, that it was illegal for him to talk to a Samaritan. The story of Mary and Martha when Jesus and the guys are hanging at their house and Martha's trying to clean and Mary's sitting at Jesus's feet to learn and Martha's all mad and Jesus is like, Martha, chill out. She's doing the right thing by learning. They never taught us as kids that it was illegal for women to learn back then, and that Jesus was breaking the law by teaching women. And in that story, he's literally telling women that education is more important than housework. But the church doesn't tell you that's what the story is really about. When the bleeding woman touches Jesus's garment, the Sam Cooke had a great song about it. She's been bleeding for 12 years. She touches him and she's healed. And Jesus is like, who touched me? And she goes, me. And she's horrified. He goes, daughter, you're healed. You're good. They don't tell you that menstruation was something that men were very scared by back then, and what ritual
And
uncleanliness
some things
was.
haven't changed
Some
much.
things haven't changed at all, but this woman was not allowed to take part in her religion at all. For 12 years, she was not allowed in public. You're not allowed
Mm,
to touch a woman when she's menstruating. If you touch a chair a menstruating woman has sit on, you're unclean. They don't teach you any of this as kids. They didn't teach us that this woman going through a crowd was breaking the law. And by
mm.
touching Jesus, she was literally making him unclean in the eyes of God. And he turns around and calls this woman, who religion has deemed unworthy, he calls her daughter. It's the only time in the whole Bible Jesus calls anybody daughter.
Wow.
The guy is outrageously feminist, and it's a miracle that these woman-hating Nazis think that he's on their side. So for me, I was really young
I was
when
so
I
yes,
when I
please
realized
tell
that
us how
like
this came to you.
well, it was just really from understanding that these three women were everywhere with Jesus, and they really were probably 15 apostles. And then when you read about how Susanna and these other women were his benefactors, that Jesus's whole movement for his reformed Jewish clique, that women financed the whole operation. They were the executive producers. They don't teach you this. And so for me, I had a very strong Southern grandma. I had a very strong mother. And I realized around age 16 that it was a complete load of ahistorical, unbiblical, anti-Jesus bullshit. This Vatican policy that I call no knob, no job. And, when I heard that other Christian denominations had women ministers and that Judaism had female rabbis, but this little bit of the Roman Empire was being kept alive by these men in dresses, that was the first time I realized, wow, I'm not going to agree with this church on a whole lot. And then the gay thing followed shortly thereafter. And then we can, I will still defend the church on a lot of things. They're the best force in the world on poverty. I mean, they are so pro universal health care that every person in every society should be given health coverage, whether they can afford it or not. They're the most powerful voice in the world against the death penalty. But I mean, this church is going to realize, Vicki, that they need women a lot more than women need a church.
So at what point, so were you that young when this started to make sense to you?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't
And
use
how
words
did your
like feminist.
parents feel? Did your parents feel the same way?
I don't know. I don't know about that, but I mean,
Your
overall, yeah.
parents stayed church-going Christians, I assume.
My parents were very Catholic, and we were extremely Catholic. I mean, we had open casket reunions, Vicky. We were very Catholic. I mean, some kids had to go to church. Some kids had to go to church on holy days. We had mass on the holy days. You never miss mass, and if you're unless you're sick or dying, and if you were going to die on a Sunday, you still had time to make it to 5 p.m. mass on Saturday night. Some kids have piano lessons. I had organ lessons. My uncle was a deacon who baptized his own child. My brother was an altar boy. I'm pretty sure I was the only kid in Bohemia, Long Island, to have been baptized in his parents' living room by a priest my mother used to know in the villages of Africa in Malawi.
Oh
Um,
my
like
Lord.
I thought it was all really normal growing up, and I thought like liberation theology was what Christianity was, that you help the poor, you help the sick, you help the least among us, you do the shit Jesus talked about, you do the shit Gandhi and Dr. King talked about, and Dorothy Day and the Catholic Charities. And,
So
you
your
grow up.
parents were true Christians. I mean, they lived the ethics of Christianity.
Neither one of them were perfect people. They were both,
Well, nobody's
screwed up like the
perfect.
rest of us. But yeah, I mean, yeah,
Hmm.
I would say that was their ethos was a lot closer to Jesus than I want to have full power and domination on my local school board. And that's the Christianity that I grew up to experience. So many people were raised in this religion of love, right? By this mystic Jewish faith healer who never stopped being Jewish, by the way, never quit the tribe. And it was Paul who ruined all that. Paul blew it for everybody. But like we grow up and find that this religion in the 80s and 90s was like these mean people screaming at women outside clinics and being cruel to gay folks and now being cruel to immigrants. The only commandment in the entire Bible on immigration or borders is the commandment, both in Old Testament and New Testament, to welcome the stranger. Jesus literally says in Matthew 25 that individuals and nations are going to be judged, whether they go to heaven or hell, based on how they cared for the poor, cared for the sick, were kind to prisoners, and welcomed the stranger. This
Wow.
is why the Christian right will never fight to put a single quote of Jesus on any classroom or courtroom wall. And I just got really tired of seeing the religion of my parents being used as a cloaking device for cruelty and rank douchebaggery, and woman hating and homophobia on top of it. So, I'm just here to thump the Bible thumpers with a Bible, and I decided to write a book about how they're completely full of shit theologically, ecclesiastically, and New Testamentally. So,
And when will this book be out, John?
it's coming out, Simon and Schuster, this August. Our goal is to be banned in Florida by the holidays. We're really hoping. Please tell your listeners to call Governor DeSantis and start demanding it be banned now. That'll help my sales more than anything, folks.
Oh, it really will. So, all right, we're already here. We're going to go back and talk about John in a minute because we have to talk about what's going on because you have to help us. I mean, what is going on and what can we do? I
It's
mean, two
amazing.
days ago, Elon Musk. First of all, who is Elon Musk, and what position does he have to empower him
None. It's
to
all
go
illegal.
into the Social Security?
All illegal. It's
What is
all
go?
the most horrible pussy grabbing trust fund rich brats. Every fucking trust fund rapist college douchebag. Okay, these guys are the Wonka kids who somehow survived the factory tour. All right, these guys are aristocrats who have been raised to believe the world belongs to them. They are people who have no. I don't have anything against evil billionaires. I don't like evil billionaires who have no appreciation of their own privilege. Okay, I don't like racist liars. I don't like bullies who get off on hurting people. I don't like trust fund brats who grab women by the crotch. These are my three rules about rich guys, and both of these fuckers fail on all three counts. So this is all illegal. This is the time we're living through. A lot of people are going to have to be hurt before it gets better. But I want to remind your listeners of a couple things because my job at SiriusXM every night has sort of been talking people off ledges, but I'm blessed to talk to a lot of journalists and a lot of writers and politicians and callers who talk me off a ledge too. I take a step back from all of this. We could be alive during a horrible civil war where 600,000 are killed over slavery and there's no good Wi-Fi. We could be, but we're not. We could be alive during World War II when there's a war and a Holocaust and an atom bomb and FDR is locking up Japanese people and turning away Jews and he's the best president of the last 100 years and did all that evil shit. We could have been alive then. We're alive now. Our parents and grandparents couldn't have handled this. We're not equipped to handle this. 200 years ago, we Homo sapiens, the most excitement, the most data our brains received was if we got one letter in the mail a month. We have to remember all this data we're funneling into our brains nonstop. We're not evolutionarily designed to receive this much what the fucks yet. And that's what I call it. It's what the fuck fatigue. This is what gaslighting, gish galloping, their whole goal is to overload your what the fuck circuit so you give up, realize I can't have any power in this, and just sit on the couch and watch Kardashians and be miserable. Here's the deal. In my lifetime, Democrats have only won the White House after Republicans have totally crashed the bus.
Destroyed it. Yes.
That's it. Like we're a dumb people, okay? Like we're dumb in America. Our number one magazine is People. Our number one restaurant is McDonald's, and thousands of teenage girls turn up to see Chris Brown sing at the Today Show. We're fucking stupid. Stop expecting us to be
Or
better.
Kanye, even
Yes,
worse.
listen. Picking Barack Obama over John McCain doesn't exactly make us Angela Bassett. We're fucking stupid here still. So we're still dealing with this. But listen, Jimmy Carter got in because of Nixon and Watergate. Okay. And Bill Clinton got in because 12 years of trickle down petered out and stopped working. And Barack Obama got in because George W. Bush was the worst president in the last 100 years. In many ways, I would have said worse than Trump, but I can't say that anymore. And Joe Biden, the most legislatively successful president of my lifetime, got in with the highest vote count in history because Donald Trump was so corrosively awful. Vice President Harris was in this race for 100 days, and she still got the third highest total of anyone to ever run for president in the history of this country. She was in the race for 100 days against a guy who'd been running for it for 9 years, and she lost by 1.4
But
percentage points. This was
what
no
weren't
mandate.
you shocked? I mean, it was shocking. Were
Yes,
you
of course I was, but I'm saying it was no mandate. Okay. The majority, here's what you have to remember, and you're going to have to remember this for the rest of your lives. He didn't crack 50% in the popular vote. This
Mhm.
means the majority of Americans who showed up to vote voted against Donald Trump in 2016, 2020, and 2024. 3 elections in a row. The majority of us said no to this. So no part of this is legal. Of course, I believe they fucked with the election. Look at
Mm.
Greg Palast report. Greg Palast was on my show last week. He did a report for Tom Hartman. Everyone needs to read it. Just Google Greg Palast election 2024 and you'll see where he goes through how they blocked so many people from voting, how they removed so many thousands in each state that mattered from the voter rolls. This is what they do. They always cheat to win. Nixon cheated. Okay, Reagan cheated with the
Mm.
hostages. Nixon with his keeping the Vietnam War going longer. Bush cheated the first time with shutting down a recount. They can't win without cheating. So we'll find out when they're all dead, Vicky, and no one cares anymore. In the meantime, this is the world we're born into. This is what our generation has to handle, and it's going to be like every other generation. A third of us are going to just check out. A third of us are going to be cult members. A third of us are going to fight. A third of us are going
Oh,
to
all right,
fight
but
for
wait,
each other. But
John,
hang on, hang on, hang
go
on.
ahead, go ahead.
You got to remember, they're really bad at this, Vicky. They're stupid, they're
Well, they are
reckless, and
stupid.
they're messy. They're messy, and they're not going to be good at this. And listen, what Musk is doing now, what Trump is doing now, is not going to become more popular as the months drag on. This is going to be very, very ugly. There's not going to be a civil war. We're not going to see states seceding, but we will see sectarian violence. It's going to happen. I mean, it's going to happen. So it's going to be scary. But this is the time when America needs good, decent people. And we have to remember when our MAGA friends start realizing that they've been part of a fucking cult because they didn't mind the racism for 9 years, we can't shame them when they come out of the matrix. We've got to say, I'm glad you got it. And we can't be a bunch of liberal,
Oh,
I
come
told
on.
you
Do you
so.
really think they're going to come out of the
They're
matrix? Do you
starting
real?
to right now because with USAID being cut, with the vets, with vets health being cut, we're starting to see these hypocritical white people who delighted in racist lies against innocent Haitian migrants who never ate a single pet.
Oh
These
my
fake
God.
Christians who took pleasure in persecuting migrants. They get off on getting up in the morning and thinking, how can I be more cruel to transgender children today? These people don't give a fuck about what's in the Bible. They don't give a fuck about. Listen, after January 6th, you don't care about cops being beaten for a lie? Don't tell me you care about law and order. Tell me you care about Jesus. Their religion is power. Okay? That's it. That's what Trump sold them. When Donald Trump, comb over Caligula, comes to all these Christians and promises that I'm going to fight for you, you're going to be at that. He never, and you'll notice this, these Republicans, they never promise conservative Christians that we're going to fight for the things Jesus said. They're not interested in that, and neither are conservative Christians. They promise power. They promise the
Money.
opposite of,
Mhm,
no, no, just power. They
mhm.
promise the opposite of what's in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is all about humility and put the other guy first. They say we're going to put Christians on top. It is all white supremacist code talk. You
Mhm.
grew up expecting to inherit this America, and you shouldn't have to listen to rap music in the car next to you when you pull up at a red light. It's all code talk. It's not conservative. It's not Christian. It's not patriotic. And it's not fucking law and order. If they cared about law and order, they'd be disgusted at Donald Trump for stealing from Americans with his fraud online university scam. So he's promised them power. And now they're gradually going to start to realize things aren't getting better. Every conservative is going to know someone who loses their job or loses their farm in the next 6 months. I'm not
Exactly.
saying they're going to suddenly,
Exactly.
I'm not saying they're going to suddenly get it, but let me just give you this for your listeners to have some hope. Do you remember how these people hated you if you opposed Bush's Iraq war? Do you remember 20 years ago how they called you a terrorist lover who hated America if you thought this stupid, evil, amoral war in Iraq was a good idea? And if you thought Bush's economic plan was a good idea? And if you thought voting for John Kerry, they hated you for not supporting Bush. They were a cult and they were evil to us for not supporting George W. Bush. And what happened? What happened? As soon as Donald Trump came and said what we've been saying, but he said it in 2015, you were related to the Iraq war. They had a permission structure. They had a permission structure to see the truth because they're a cult. They're in a cult. And so as soon as they had a permission structure to see the truth, they cut Bush loose, and George W. Bush has not been invited to the last, what, four Republican national conventions in a row? They hated you for not being obedient to Bush, and now the Frankenstein monster found a mad scientist that liked better. You don't think these fickle, amoral motherfuckers are going to toss Donald Trump away
Yeah, but
when
what
he's
happens
not
in the
giving them what they want?
meantime?
A lot of
What
people
hap
are going to get hurt. A lot of people are going to get hurt. That's how it's going to be. I'm not saying it's going to
A
be
lot of
clean.
us are going to get hurt. So, you were saying
A
how we're
lot of,
not living.
actually, I think a lot of people that don't look like you and me are going to get hurt first.
Well, yes, that's absolutely the truth. But okay, so Musk goes in, he starts messing with Social Security. Can he do it? Can he stop? What is he going to do?
He's going to
What's he going to
fuck.
do with that?
He's going to hurt a lot of people. He's going to fuck up, and karma plays a long game. How's that for a prediction? He's messy. I have no faith that Elon Musk. Look at Twitter. Look at Twitter. He literally just thought, okay, let me buy this thing, and then I'll ruin it, and that worked. So let me do the same with America. I mean, look at Twitter. He's driven away more sponsors than Andy Dick at Betty Ford with that site. I mean, I'm sorry. Elon Musk makes me ashamed to be a racist billionaire with a ketamine addiction. He really does. And he's a debit to his race. Look, the guy's messy. Trump's messy. I hoped, Vicki, that they were just going to get in there and grift away and just steal from the Treasury and just run off and make off like baby Dr. Valier. But no, they're really going to try to hurt a lot of people. And let's just say, I don't think the FBI and CIA are going to really appreciate the way they're being treated. I don't think the nation's spies are going to really enjoy the way they're being treated. And I happen to think that Trump and Musk are a couple of guys who might just have a whole lot in their past they want to keep hidden. It is going to
Can
be
they be
crazy and people are going to
stopped?
get hurt.
Can they be stopped?
They can be.
What can we do?
I don't know what we can do. The only ways that they can be stopped are by violence, which I don't recommend, the Republicans in Congress becoming moral, brave people, or the most likely savior, the 9 inches of plaque that surrounds Donald Trump's heart. Because he's not well.
Oh,
He's
come
not
on,
well.
Vance. Vance
He's
is
tired.
scary as
You think Vance is going to have any charisma over MAGA? You think
yeah.
this cult is going to take to the new high priest just because he got hand? Please, he's already back in basements doing podcasts again. Vance is. Let me tell you, I'd love to see JD Vance try to be president. It'd be delightful. He's more evil than Trump. He's more evil than Trump because he knows better. He
Mm.
knows what Trump really is. But like so many of these godless Republicans, and no offense to atheists, I just do that to insult, fake Christians. Uh, he's an opportunist and he cares more about himself. And look, JD Vance is cooked. JD Vance's kids are going to grow up and know what a racist their dad is. JD Vance's kids, who are mixed race immigrants, are going to grow up to know that their father spread a racist lie about innocent Haitian migrants eating pets after he knew it wasn't true. And they're going to know that he fought to get that racist douchebag on Elon Musk's team who insulted who? Oh, yeah, Indian Americans to get that racist hired again. That's what Elon Musk gets. That's what JD Vance's kids get to grow up and learn their father stands for because their mother already knows that that kind of racism is acceptable to the man she had kids with.
Oh God. Okay, and what about Kennedy? What about this crazy insanity?
You think it's going to end well? You think RFK Jr.? I mean, there's how many? I believe last I checked, it was 9 people have died of measles in Texas in the last 2 weeks who were unvaccinated. I mean, a lot of people are going to get hurt. Darwin has an expression for that, but the bad sad thing about it is they're going to hurt a lot of innocent people too. And RFK's a grifter. RFK had his whole life to get into local or state politics, but he didn't want to. He wanted to run for president and sell his last name to the highest bidder. And Vice President Harris would not give him the time of day.
Right.
And Donald Trump, who RFK despises and, like Vance, used to tell the truth about, they've both called him a Nazi. They've both called him a Nazi, and they've both revealed that being a Nazi is acceptable to them. That's RFK. I mean, I can't wait to see RFK make us all realize how healthy he is.
You sound like Larry David. Do you
Speaking of Larry David, RFK's wife. Well, no, I'm not going to say anything about that. But honestly, RFK breaks my heart because I've known him, I've admired him. I listened to Ring of Fire Radio for years. I've interviewed him on TV. He's been on my show, and this is just, what having all this money wasn't enough. Having all this inherited wealth wasn't enough for you. You needed more power. Just please, everyone, look at the video that Caroline Kennedy did, and and Google how his wife ended her life, and you'll know all about this guy. And by the way, the thing about RFK, all those years he was an environmental justice lawyer, and he sold it all out for a man who calls climate change a hoax. He believes in nothing but his own power and his own celebrity. These are narcissists, and that's what Musk is. That's what Vance is. And you put a bunch of narcissists in a room together and expect them to work together, it's going to be really ugly. It's going to be really messy. And everyone who voted against this is going to live to be very proud of themselves for voting against this. And that's the majority of us.
Well, so at the beginning of this, John, you were saying, so we didn't live through the Holocaust. We didn't live through these horrible times. It looks to me, though, that these people are really, really dangerous.
Yeah.
And what they've just proved to do in the last few weeks, I can't imagine what they're going to do in 4 years.
They are literally doing ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Like they're literally going to try to have, I mean, so terrorists will hate us for the next, I mean, my God, Israel was just occupied. We're going to actually Trail of Tears them the fuck out. And like that's going to happen. You think Palestinians are going to give up their homeland because this racist landlord told them to? And you
Yeah,
think there's going to be a
he's going to build a Trump Tower in
let me ask you,
Gaza.
what Muslim nation has got a military that has soldiers that are going to assist forcibly removing Palestinians from Gaza? No, it would have to be the US military that did that. It's not going to happen. And meanwhile, this godless motherfucker is carving up Ukraine for Vladimir Putin. Like he's literally is
But
not
he's
capable.
also an idiot and he doesn't know the
Doesn't
facts.
no,
I
he
mean, he
doesn't.
said
No,
yesterday on 2 days
he's
ago on the
already
news
done.
that Ukraine started the war. I mean, he
Yeah,
doesn't know the facts.
he does know the facts. He's lying because he thinks that he can get away with it if 1/3 of the culture believes him. And
Wow.
so far, he's pulled that off. He would be in jail right now. He would be going to jail otherwise. But that's
Exactly.
all you need. Hitler needed 1/3 of the culture. The King George needed 1/3 of us to stay loyal because 1/3's always apathetic. And then the 1/3 that wants change, you know how it is. You've been to parades. We all fucking fight with the abortion people and the gay people and the medical research people and the hemp people. Like we're just this crazy, the union people, and here's the minorities, the immigrants' rights groups. Like we're just this crazy assemblage of wacky coalitions. I'm not a Democrat. I've never belonged to one. Democrats have to corral so many people at the same time. And again, listen, I'm convinced. I think probably Harris would have won. I'd love to see audits of every single swing state because there's nothing to be ashamed of. And Democrats are acting like Donald Trump was Reagan in '84 and won 49 states. I don't understand this groveling. I don't understand these media figures just going to Mar-a-Lago on the groveling Weasel Express train. My God, Vicki, look how you got me all heated up here. You wanted to talk about politics, and my God. So listen, it's scary, it's bleak, I know, but they want you to despair. And at the time we're living in right now, despair is privilege. You don't get to despair. You get to check out and not read the news for a few hours every day and prioritize turning off the news, prioritize putting down goddamn screens and being in the world. And if you are feeling too overwhelmed by all this horrific shit going down, then it's your job to find somebody who's more overwhelmed than you and be strong for them because that's how we're going to get through it. We're going to get through it one heart at a time. And it's going to be as much kids convincing their parents of science over the dinner table as it's going to be us being kind to each other. And it's going to be tough, but we're going to have to resist a lot of liberalized, smug, I told you so's for the next few years because it's going to take an extremely broad coalition. And it's not going to happen unless the Democratic Party decides to finally not ever let Republicans pretend to be the party of working people ever again. It's a sin that a billionaire with a gold toilet was able to defeat the most pro-union administration in history. That's how fucking stupid we are. That's the mountain Democrats have to push a rock up.
Is it going to do us any good to do these things like not buy Amazon on this
Sometimes,
day? Is it going to
sometimes, yes, build movements. You know what I want the Democrats to do? I think we should take a page out of what the Republicans did when they were trying to repeal Obamacare every week. Remember way back in the midst of time, kids,
Mhm.
back in Obama's first term when he had this thing and it was Obamacare, and it wasn't great. It wasn't the public option or universal care we needed, but it did cut the uninsured rate in half. Well,
Mhm.
Republicans filed motions to repeal it every single week. There was 70 odd motions to repeal, and we laughed at them. We laughed at how stupid this was. Oh, it's the 69th. But what were they doing all the time? They were showing their base that we are fighting this thing you hate, whether it works or not. And they
Mhm.
fundraised off of it and they messaged off of it and they kept the message consistent. We're going to stop poor people from getting health care because we're fucking stupid and we want uninsured people to show up at the emergency room so local taxpayers have to pay for it. That was their whole message. And Democrats couldn't call them out on it. But we laughed at them. But that's why I want to see a different Democrat introduce new articles of impeachment every week. A different Democrat in the House for a
I
different
love
crime
that.
every week. And they're going to laugh at them. And I want them to keep on doing it. And I want there to be 25 different articles of impeachment by the time summer's here. Keep doing it and just keep the pressure on because this is not going to start getting better. And
No.
more people aren't going to start checking out. People are going to get shocked. People are going to suffer. People that don't give a fuck now are going to suddenly know someone they care about. And this is the biggest difference to me between conservatives and liberals. It's very vulgar and very, very simplistic, but liberals are capable of caring about people they don't know. Republicans sometimes, not always, require what I call 1 degree of separation. It's got to be someone they know. I'm a
Mm.
homophobe until my son comes out, and now, okay, I love,
I
I don't,
accept.
I accept it. Yeah. So it's like Rob Portman wrote the Defense of Marriage Act, anti-gay his whole life. Then his son came out as gay, and he was like, "Oh my God, I don't hate these people. I love them. It's my son. I wish his son had come out as poor, but like not going to get better for these guys. Trump's poll numbers are not going to go up. Prices are not going to go down, and these policies are not going to work. So the cult of white supremacy will hold for a long time, but not forever. And let George Bush remind you these people are fickle and they will drop their idols for a new one.
Oh, I hope so. Oh, I
They
hope
will.
so.
They will. Well, you got to stay really healthy, everyone, because I want you all to be alive when Donald Trump dies. I don't want him to die. I don't want him to die. I don't want him to suffer. I want three goes to visit him on Christmas Eve and make him a good person, but he's going to go at some point. So you've got to stay healthy, everybody, and exercise and eat right and watch the alcohol and the partying because you don't want to miss that. You don't want to miss the Trump funeral. You know Melania's bringing a date to the Trump funeral. Stay healthy and stay alive long enough to watch his name taken down from all these buildings and his grandchildren change their last name. I'm just sorry that between now and then, a lot of people are going to get hurt. But America's not learning our lesson. We don't have empathy. We don't look out for each other. And I hate it to say it, but sometimes with us, it's going to have to get worse before it gets better. We eventually getting around to doing the right thing, but it was
Do you think
300 years for
empathy is
slavery.
something that can be learned?
I do. I do. But not if you're not around people who practice it. Not if you're in a community that views it as weakness and views cruelty as strength. And weak people view what this administration is doing as strong.
Okay, on that note, let's get back to John. That's all excellent, except
What a sermon. My God.
it's
By the way, folks, my show's not always this preachy. Tune in sometime. There's dick jokes too, I promise.
no, but that was very it's scary, but it's also it's hopeful in its fashion.
Oh, it is for me.
It
I mean,
is.
I'm not pretending it's not going to be
You're getting
hard.
applause. You're getting applause on that.
I'm
on
not
the
pretending it's not
concept.
going to be hard and people are going to get hurt. I'm sorry that I'm going to have to make fun of it. I apologize in advance for all the jokes I'm going to make. But as John Lennon said, ridicule and nonviolence are all you have to fight against fascism. And we're going to get through this. It's going to be hard. It's going to take a while. But I have a lot of belief. You know, when I was a kid, you know how gay people were treated.
Mhm.
You know how gay people were treated when we were kids. I had kids come out to me in high school because they knew I worked in theater and knew other gay people. And it was like, if you had HIV in the 80s, they could fire you and be so cruel to you. And look how far gay people have come in this society that within a generation, you've got sitting Vice President Joe Biden endorsing marriage equality during a re-election race. Gay people, we witnessed, from AIDS to marriage equality, the swiftest advancement for civil rights of any oppressed minority in history. And it happened because of a plague, and America helped lead the way. And so many of us have convinced our older conservative loved ones to give up the homophobia. So
Yeah, but what's going to happen now? What's
it's going
going
to be hard, but it's because of what I've witnessed that I have to believe that America is capable of growth and evolution and goodness, and to begin trying to make things right. We're a long way from reparations for, you know, the descendants of slaves and the Indians, but I know that this kind of amateur hour, evil, greedy, robber baron bullshit gets old really fast, and I just have to have faith that the majority of us are going to show up and care about each other as it gets worse. I don't think people are going to become more apathetic or more pro-Trump, Vicky. That's what I can tell you.
Well, I absolutely hope you're right. I believe that's true.
I refuse to be bleak because that's what they want. Never let a Nazi see you cry.
Now that's the next book. I like that title. Okay, so let's get back to John. So John, so you have these parents that, and you
Yes.
have this upbringing, and you are on Long Island, and what what is the so are your parents creatives
No,
amidst all of this other stuff?
no.
They're not.
My dad's a teacher. My mom was a nurse. Yeah.
Your dad's a teacher, your mom's a nurse. And when do you notice that you're kind of funny?
Oh, I don't know about. First time I attempted foreplay, I guess. I was saved from being a Long Island douchebag because I got into regional theater at age 11. And
What was your
when
first play?
first time I got paid for it was a production of A Christmas Carol when I was 11 years old. And then when I was 12, I got
You
to be
got
in it.
paid at 11?
Yeah, regional, you know, only a couple of bucks per show.
What was your what part did you have in A Christmas
I'm just
Carol?
a couple of little random boys, you know. When I was 12, I got to be in Hamlet, and that was it. I spent several months of my life working with all adults. I was the player queen in the play within a play, the boy they have played the queen in a play
Wow.
within a play.
Hmm.
And for several months of my life in seventh grade, every night I would finish dinner, Dad would drive me to rehearsal, and I'd be around all these adults. The head of the Shakespeare department at University of Michigan was directing us, and I mean,
Wow.
it was the first time I ever got a review in the paper, and it was my life went from black and white to color. Shakespeare totally
How
turned me
did
on when
you
I was 12.
how did you manage that as an 11-year? How did you manage to get into that regional world at such a young age?
I just auditioned for a play and got in, and when
And
the
your
play,
parents supported that?
oh yeah, totally. I was a weird kid. They were happy I found a thing because sports wasn't it. And then I, you know, hung around this theater because I wasn't really interested in kids my own age, and I wound up doing stage crew or lighting or sound. I was an usher. Like I just was the kid who was there to work for free and would do anything. And so I worked for free for years. I grew up. I would get home from school, do my homework, hop on the bus, go to the theater, be around adults, you know, and I had a blast. And so that was my education.
And
I
when did
was
you start doing stand up?
out of college, a couple years out of college, I started, and I'd always wanted to. And at first, I did it for stage time. And then you know I just I had seen George Carlin when I was 20 years old, and it changed my life. And it was it was the first time I ever watched the comedian and thought, oh my God, I want to do that because I liked how from the Jammin' in New York album on, he always said he was an essayist, not a comedian. And
Right.
I agree. From that, they talk about the two different phases of George Carlin. There were three. And from 1991, the first Persian Gulf War, the Jammin' in New York album, from that went on, that's when he came out and gave these sermons, you know, and kept all the dirty jokes, but he was different. It was a different performer. They called him angrier, but I just thought he had so much passion, and he was my patron saint. He changed my life.
And so, do you remember when you very first started? Were you doing jokes, or were you doing certain? Were you?
Oh, I was doing jokes. Yeah. I mean, I was doing all kinds of goofy stuff. I was doing like celebrity books on tape, bits, and oh, what are you there, God? It's me, Margaret, read by Keith Richards. I was doing stuff like that. So.
And so, how did you segue into interviewing? Because you started doing that a very long time ago as well. Because I know that you interviewed two different Beatles in two different parts of the world in the same week. And I don't know how you pulled that off, and you have to explain because I
Oh, well,
still don't know that story.
VH1 sent some people down to see me. I was doing a solo show in Greenwich Village at a club. I was doing like a monthly show and I was getting good reviews. And, I wanted to work in the cabaret field because I wanted to get a big press kit. I wanted to, instead of doing comedy clubs all the time, I also wanted to do an hour-long show once a month and be able to get cabaret critics down because they had a whole scene. And after a year, I had a whole lot of reviews, and that led to people coming down and seeing me. And that's how I got my first agent at William Morris. And VH1 came down, and I had a whole bit where I just savaged VH1 as a channel. And they said, "Hey, we're relaunching. Come work for us." And they hired me to be like their funny guy, but I wound up being the classic rock nerd. And so they wound up sending me out to do interviews, and it sort of became my broadcasting grad school. And I learned interviewing people that I was not interested in, how to do it and how not to do it. And I was terrible for many years. But then one time, Paul McCartney picked me to come interview him in London, and I'd never been, and I was so excited. It was a live show. And then right before we left, I got a call saying, "Hey, you need to go to London a day later." And I said, "Oh no, that's the worst, man. Why?" And they said, "We need you in New York Wednesday to interview George Harrison and Ravi Shankar."
Okay, now this George Harrison story is unbelievable. Tell your George
Oh, I
Harrison
just love
story.
George Harrison. He was my guy. Like I love all the Beatles. I'm a fanatic. I mean, like I have enough Beatle bootlegs to end a marriage. And but George was always very special to me.
I was a George.
He was raised Catholic, and then his spirituality got deeper, and like he just evolved so much. I mean, I have a whole playlist of George Harrison 80s music because it sounds nothing like George Harrison in the 70s or Beatles George Harrison. And I had every B-side he'd ever done, and the spirituality inspired me so much. And so he came in to do a 10-minute interview, and I was the worst interviewer of all time. I met my idol, and I was a capering loon, and I couldn't shut up, and I couldn't stop making bad jokes, and I couldn't slow down, and I was so hyper, and all the ADHD from my childhood came out. And but I knew if I talked about the Beatles, he'd get up and leave. So I talked about God, and I talked about what happens when you die, and I talked about the human soul, and I asked about music as meditation. And when I knew
Wow.
I wanted to beat him up for not touring, and I'd never seen him tour. I had seen him play live at the Dylan tribute show, but he hadn't toured in 20 years. And I was like, don't you get that same buzz from playing live with an audience that you do in meditation in your garden? He goes, oh no, nothing at all. Like, no. But he enjoyed the fact that I was raw and that I wasn't polished and that I knew what I was talking about. And he stayed for like 4 hours. And we put a guitar in his hand. One of the crew's girlfriend came and she had her guitar and we put it in his hands, and we just goofed off, and he wound up playing four songs that he had never played in public. One was a Vedic chant with Ravi, and then he did a Wilbury song he had never played live that Dylan had sung, and he did All Things Must Pass, which he never played live. The only time he ever played it live was sitting next to me on a couch.
What?
And he played a song that had never been released that wound up being the first track on his posthumous record. So it was amazing. And then he left, and it changed my life, and it got me into therapy because I had met my idol and I was an idiot and I was so ashamed for so many years. And then it took me a long time to forgive the kid that I was for not being perfect. And it helped me understand celebrity, helped me understand who I didn't want to be and who I did want to be. And I met his widow years later, and she thanked me for the interview. And so that really did it for me. And
And
then
didn't
Martin,
it turn out that that was the last time that he played?
that was the last his last televised performance. He did play one more time at Carl Perkins' funeral, but that was never broadcast. You can
Mhm.
see that video on YouTube. But and it was the last time he did a long interview like that. And for years, we've talked about, oh, maybe we can get it all released. Martin Scorsese used some clips of it in his excellent George Harrison documentary. So because of that, I finally got to be in a Martin Scorsese movie. But as soon as we were done, and he was wonderful, and he hugged me, and I had to leave and go straight to the airport and catch a red eye to get to London to talk to McCartney on the weekend. And McCartney's people were furious that George was willing to play for me, but he wouldn't play with Paul for anything they had pitched him. So it was a very surreal weekend, and Paul was a prince, and I got to work with Paul a few times after that.
Well, so now having had that experience with George, did you approach Paul differently as a result?
Nope.
No.
I thought it gave me some street cred. I knew it gave me street cred because I made sure
Mhm.
I told his people. So I knew that by the time Paul and I hung out, his people would have told him that George had just done my show for 4 hours. So I figured, let me try and see if that raises Paul's game on the competition level, because those two. And I mean, but he's McCartney. He's the greatest in the world. He always brings it. He like wrote a song backstage in the dressing room and sang it on our show. He was incredible. So
Wow. So we were talking before we came on the air about his three shows at the Bowery Ballroom last week that you were invited to all three and didn't get to go.
I worked
Uh,
nights, so I couldn't go. And then I was a single dad. And then the last night I was invited to go and take my son, but we had to fly to LA. So, but during the pandemic, Vicky, it got so bad in New York. At one point, I made a promise to God, if she's real or not, that if Paul McCartney ever tours again, I promise I'm going to take my kid and make that his first concert. And then he came, so I took my kid, and Springsteen came out and sang with him, and it was amazing. And that was my child's first ever concert. So
oh, fantastic.
maybe it's gonna
Okay,
be a
so now we
meaningful.
have to talk about Dylan before I promised you an hour and we're going to talk about Dylan and we're going to get out. So Dylan lovers, Dylan aficionados, both of us. Um, but I've had a very different experience. So I heard you say on a podcast that every time you've seen Dylan, the audience is walking out, but the last 20 minutes they get on their feet. And I told you that I just saw him just a few months ago at the Hollywood
Yeah,
Bowl, and it was a star-studded
I know.
audience because he hadn't played LA in a long time.
He
And
played LA
I
last
mean,
year. He played LA in 23.
okay, maybe he hadn't played the Hollywood Bowl, I guess, in a
Okay.
gazillion years. And in a gazillion years, he hadn't played there in a long time. And
I understand.
it was
I'm
star
I'm
studded.
I'm not here to defend Bob Dylan shows to people
Okay,
who
all
didn't
I'm
like
going
a
to
Bob Dylan
say
show.
is that he did not play guitar.
No, he hasn't played guitar in 20 years.
He played harmonica for 30 seconds.
Uh-huh.
He played piano. He didn't get
Yes.
out from behind the piano. The
I
piano
know.
was very high. We could
Since
barely see his
since
face.
2002, and he hides from the audience. He wears big
He
hats, or he's in the darkness, or he's behind. He did a whole show hiding behind an upright piano. He hides from the audience.
he hid. The
Yeah.
only song that he did of his that was that we could get was he did Highway 61 Revisited, but of course you wouldn't know that it was Highway 61 Revisited based on the version that he did that night. And his
Yeah.
band was kind of a mess. And I went with someone who was a huge fan who's 78 years old, had never seen Dylan, huge fan, waited his whole life. And he wanted to get a t-shirt saying, I came to see Bob Dylan and all I got was this fucking t-shirt because
Yeah.
it was so disappointing.
Okay.
So tell me
All right,
what
I'll tell
gets
you.
people on their feet because that was not the experience. I was
Okay.
so crushed.
Okay. No, I understand. I've had to talk to thousands of people like you through my life. Here's the deal. I've seen Bob Dylan live 60 sometimes. For me, the greatest period was mid 90s. But
Mm.
what you saw was not Bob Dylan playing at a theater or a club. You saw Bob Dylan as a middle act in an all-day music festival, right?
No, it was just Mellencamp, Dylan, and Willie
Willie
Nelson.
Nelson. Okay, so the Outlaw Music Festival.
Right.
Right. Now this was a really wacky set list because, yeah, even for Bob, he'd been on tour playing just the Rough and Rowdy Ways album and then maybe four other songs since 2021.
Hmm.
And he just done just this tour. Like when I was growing up, you'd go see Bob because you never knew what he'd play. Every night it would be a different set list. And it was so much fun every night. And for some of the songs, he does a totally different arrangement every year. And you're like, oh, what song
Right.
is this? You'd have to wait till you figure out what it was. And what I like about Bob Dylan is that he's like still pushing it. He's still trying to find a sound. He doesn't come out there and play the hits and try to sound like the album. He doesn't give a fuck about that, and he never has. This is
Right.
Bob Dylan, and his number one concern has always been playing the music he wants to play while also confounding expectations. And he is not afraid to disappoint you by suddenly becoming a born again Christian and playing evangelical gospel music, or by suddenly releasing 5 albums of Sinatra covers, or by spending the 80s sounding like a human kazoo. Bob is doing what Bob wants to do. And sometimes it is great. I have seen him 60 times, and it
Wow.
is miraculous to me how he can make. I've never seen someone come on stage, not talk to people, make no small talk at all, and turn a couple thousand seats into a tiny room. I've seen him make it intimate in ways that Paul McCartney and U2 and Bruce Springsteen cannot do. And there's
Wow.
other times where he comes out and he throws the shit at the wall and it doesn't totally work, or it doesn't work for everyone, or it only works if you already know the songs he's playing so you can understand what he's doing now. And the show that you saw was crazy because the first night of that Outlaw Music Tour, he didn't do any songs from Rough and Rowdy Ways. So it was the first time since before the pandemic, since 2019, that Bob Dylan had done a show that wasn't all this new album in 2020. And the show that you went to, I'm looking at the set list right now, it was crazy. He did Little Queenie by Chuck Berry. I
Right.
mean, if he had done, Roll Over
Which
Beethoven
didn't
or
sound anything like Little Queenie, by the way.
I know it, but if he had come out and done Johnny Be Good, everybody would have cheered. But he did
Right.
that. He did the Fleetwood's Mr. Blue. He did Stella Blue by the Grateful Dead, 6 Days on the Road by Paul Davis, and the best known song of his own in the entire set, maybe Ballad of a Thin Man. I mean,
Yes.
maybe like he was
Hmm.
doing
Which didn't sound like Ballad of a Thin Man
well,
at
none of it sounds
all.
like that.
Yeah.
So what I recommend is, look, listen to the more recent Bob Dylan albums, and if you want to know what he sounds like, you can just go on YouTube and pick a city, pick a year, pick a show. You'll find out which ones are considered great. Someday they'll be releasing tons and tons of his live albums so people can hear it because when he's right, he's the best in the business. But when he fails because he doesn't give a fuck about expectations. He does not want to be seen as a legend. He wants to bust out your brains by doing something you've never heard before. It doesn't always work. And I think that's why so many of us keep going back because look, I've taken my wife to see Bob Dylan over 25 times. I can't believe she's still with me, but she has seen it, but she keeps going. And my wife doesn't listen to Bob Dylan when she's sitting home alone. Tom Petty, she did. I take that as a great marriage win, but she's not a Dylan. But my wife keeps going because she has seen these transcendent, incredible performances as well. And also, you want to be able to tell your kids you saw Louis Armstrong, you saw Shakespeare, I mean, I got to see Ray Charles. I got to see Little Richard. I saw Leonard Cohen. I got to see Nina Simone. I've seen some great ones. The piano, he has not played guitar since 2002.
Wow.
Only a few times since 2002 has he played guitar. He did it at Farm Aid last year, but very, very rarely will he play guitar on stage. And he's been behind keyboards for 20 years, but every tour he changes it. It was an electric piano. It was a grand piano. He now he's hiding behind it. Like if you're in the first 2 rows, you probably don't see him. He does it on purpose. It's his thing. It's part of the experience
Yeah.
of complaining about Bob
There
Dylan.
weren't even screens. He
Never,
wasn't up
he
on the
never. The
screens.
only
Yeah.
time he's ever done screens ever was when he did the Desert Trip show back in 2017, where they had like the Stones and McCartney and Roger Waters and
Right,
Bob.
right, right.
And for that set, I don't know what they paid this old man, but he did a set of all hits with the giant Jumbotron screens. And it's the
Wow.
only time since the 70s he's done anything like that.
Wow. Okay, so now let's talk about the movie for a moment. Um, because I loved it.
I loved
What
it.
did you
I went expecting to hate it, and
Me too.
I was on a rewrite deadline for my book, and so I didn't get to go see it on Christmas. Like I had to wait. It was like the second week of January. I turned to my book on a Friday. We went to the 10:30 a.m. showing on Saturday morning, and I expected to be like one of these cynical. Oh, Pete Seeger wasn't in the hospital room when Bob met Woody. Woody Guthrie didn't give him a harmonica. I was all set to be that guy. And my son was with me. He's 12, but he said he wanted to see it. It was his first R-rated movie. And I cried in the first 10 minutes. I
Yeah.
cried in the first 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, this is not a book for the bitter old Bob Dylan diehard fans. This is a book for young, clean, unspoiled people to help turn them one day into bitter old Bob Dylan diehard fans. One day, young people turned on by this will be miserable and they'll be on Expecting Rain every day like me. So I loved it. It's going to win Best Actor, may very well
No,
win
it's
Best
not.
Supporting
The
Actor.
Brutalist, no. Adrian Brody, yeah.
I
The
don't know.
Brutalist is going to, unfortunately, I just
I
voted for Timothy Chalamet today
I
for the
think it's
SAG
going to win.
Award.
I think it's going to win Best Actor. I think it has a good shot of winning Best Supporting Actor.
I
But
wish, I
everyone's got to
wish.
see it. And I love James Mangold. I loved that fifth Indiana Jones movie. That is my unpopular opinion. I think that
Mhm.
fifth Indiana Jones movie, that was the first Indiana Jones movie that ever made me cry. So like I'll see anything Mangold does. I love fucking Logan. But this movie, this is a special. This is not some biopic. I mean, it is. It's like, and then this happened, and it's sort of like the beginner's guide to young Bob Dylan. It should have gone wrong in so many ways, but it has a great tension because the 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 antagonist is the good guy
Mhm.
and the protagonist is a dick. Pete Seeger is this incredibly moral heart and soul of the film. And the smartest thing Jay Cox did with that script by making Pete Seeger the force that Bob is up against, this incredibly decent force, it
Mhm.
makes you care so much about all the characters. You care about Joan Baez. You care about the character of Sylvie based on
Mhm. Right.
Susie. And so, on a storytelling level, like, how do you do it when your protagonist is a dick and everyone who knows him back then says he was a dick? And God bless Bob for approving of this script where he is such a dick in it.
Right.
He made them change, Susie's name to Sylvie.
Right.
That was
Why?
like,
Do you know why?
she died a few years ago. Yeah. And maybe he feels bad about how he treated her, but it's proof that he cares. And, look, anyone will give you stories about Bob Dylan not being a nice guy, but that's
I have
not
to tell
why
you a
people
quick
like him.
story
Okay.
about in 1989. Kenny Aronson, my friend, was playing
I
bass with Bob.
Great guy, great guy. And
Okay,
that was a tough tour. Let me tell you, those are bootlegs I don't listen to very much. 80s,
okay,
late
so
80s is tough.
so Kenny invited me to the recording studio to meet Bob because Bob was my god and my
Yeah,
hero. And I coming up on the elevator and I'm getting off the elevator and Kenny stops me and he says, "Go home." I
yeah,
was like, "What?" And he said, "You don't want to meet him today."
yeah.
I was like, but it was one of those days where Bob was just,
I almost met him once, the night before the Grammys outside the rehearsal on 49th Street, but I he made eye contact with me and I didn't talk to him because I don't need to. I don't want to be the 2 billionth person to try to say something to him because he's already heard it from a lot of people better than me. And there's no way I could ever give him what he gave me. So, I try to write stuff that other people will like and try to pay it forward because what can I say to like when I first met George Harrison and Paul McCartney, all I could do was be as irreverent as possible and not give a fuck because that's the only way these guys can ever take you seriously. If you go up to them as an acolyte, oh my God, they're bored. Look at how it drove Marlon Brando insane. Look at how Brando lost his goddamn mind by being worshipped in his own lifetime. So,
mm.
Bob, old weird Bob. That's what David Crosby used to call him. Uh, Cros always would say, "Old weird Bob," and that's who he's always been, and that's why he's a fascinating artist. And I'm just glad I got to be alive at the same time as him. And the fact that he at 80 could put out an album like Rough and Rowdy Ways is just insane. The songwriting on that record, insane. How he puts this album out right when the pandemic begins, and it's like nothing he's ever released. Half the songs don't have drums. I mean, it's incredible what he's doing with this record. So, I mean, you listen to that 25-minute long JFK song, and there's like three people playing piano on it. It's insane how he's pushing his own creative boundaries into his 80s. So if he does a show where he tries something fucked up and it doesn't work, I got to be a part of his process. And it's going to let me know that if I fuck up, well, maybe I can turn around and, put out a Bob Dylan put out, what, New Morning. No, no, he put out a
I love
self-portrait.
New
I
Morning.
love New Morning too, but Self-Portrait's a bad record. He put it out on purpose. You turn around from that, and then you put out, Blood in the Tracks. It's like it's okay. It doesn't all have to be great. It's a long game, and all your work is a link in a chain. And sometimes you got to do the bad nights and have the bad shows. You can have a great one the next night.
He's
Many
going
good,
back out, and I want to
yeah.
go again.
I'm going to get, yeah, and with Willie, I'm going to go see him. But like in Ken Burns' Jazz, I'll leave you with this. They have this whole piece where they talk about how a lot of the guys didn't respect Benny Goodman because his orchestra never made mistakes. They always sounded perfect in
Wow.
every live show, and that told the real jazz guys that these guys were not playing to the top of their ability. They were playing to
Mm,
make it sound exactly like the record, and they weren't taking
mm.
risks. So don't feel bad if not all your art doesn't work. Bob Dylan is the patron saint of trying it because you got to try it whether they get it or not, and that has value, even if it just means you saw Bob Dylan and he sucked.
Well, I've
How's
sucked many
that?
times, so there you go.
Did I handle the assignment? Did I handle the assignment?
You handled the assignment brilliantly. Thank you so much, John. It was so wonderful to
Thank
spend
you,
this
Vicki.
time with you.
Great to see you as well, and thanks to all of your fans. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks, John.